today. By the way, excuse the tie, but I'm having trouble with throat this morning and whatever. We'll, I figured since most of you guys aren't wearing ties, it's okay. Is that okay? Today is the final installment in the series When God is Stern. In this short series, what we've been doing is asking the question, why has God allowed our nation's culture to become so rotten? Why have our leaders changed from public servants to corrupt despots? Why has our population drifted away from Christian ethics into pagan immorality? Now, in order to fully appreciate this last action by God, this fourth one, we need to review where we've been because they connect together, actually. First of all, we started off looking at Psalm 66, and we saw that God will often try us as silver is tried. The whole point behind that was to purge dross away and to demonstrate that we are what we claim to be. The second sermon followed very much the same thing, kind of a different image, was the idea of a vine being pruned. And the whole point was that if you are fruitful, you are going to be caught back. You're going to have times of trial. You're going to have those things. It's meant to improve the quality of your fruit. However, if you don't bear fruit, there is the idea of being purged. Last week, we talked in Psalm 80, where God had literally turned the people over to jail, to all kinds of problems and whatever. And they said, and the prayer was, won't you revive us again so that you can have your favor on us? And we discussed at that point that there is, unfortunately, a natural cycle of apostasy and revival. And during times of apostasy, God brings discipline in an effort to have His people return back to where they ought to be. And we looked at the book of Judges and saw that there was just this 40-year cycle of that. We took a look at American history and saw that there's been a history of revival throughout American history. Well, if you'll notice, every one of these are talking about being restored. And as with all of these, love requires discipline. And what we often forget, we have come in our society at this point to make love so soft that it's only about being nice and whatever, and we've almost lost among the general population the idea that if you love somebody, you correct them, you stop them, you discipline them. And that is a great expression of love. It doesn't mean that you're trying to hurt them. The goal is to help them. And you can see that God's love requires this. It requires a stern side, and we ought to love Him for it. Let me illustrate to you this way. Back in my last congregation, there was a lot of conflict going on. And I was struggling. And I was talking with my immediate superior, and I said, Bill, what am I doing wrong? And he said to me, John, you're not doing anything wrong. But I'm going to tell you this. If you do something wrong, I'm going to talk to you, and we're going to have a come to Jesus talk. And it won't be long, it'll be quick. And I promise you, I'll give you a come to Jesus talk. That was such a relief to me. That somebody loved me enough that they wouldn't let me keep doing something dumb.
Amen.
You see what I mean? Now, fortunately, Bill's never given me a come to Jesus talk, and I'm thankful for that. But the bottom line of it is, love has a stern side, and that's what we've been talking about. And the point that I'm trying to get across to us is that God is trying to discipline us, that love requires this. However, and this is a big however, many, if not most, refuse to be disciplined. Okay? And this is where we get to our topic today, the wrath of God. This is not the most fun sermon I've ever preached, but it's probably one of the most necessary. And the reason for that is that while people have become indifferent to God, they don't pay any attention to Him or whatever, and that's largely because they see God as kind of a bearded old man who floats around in the sky, being nice and gentle and whatever, kind of the cosmic vending machine where you drop in the quarter of your prayers and select the blessing of your choice. He's kind of, just like that. And what's been lost is that God is the moral governor of the universe. And that we are ultimately accountable to Him. Every one of us. We are. Oh, I know Bill Maher and that whole crew will tell you God doesn't exist and therefore we're not accountable for anything and we can do what we want and get away with it. They can say what they want. Someday they're going to stand eyeball to eyeball to Jesus and literally there will be hell to pay. Okay? Please understand that. Now, having said those things, those who refuse to be disciplined suffer God's wrath. Let's take a look. I want to give you the background of our text before we read it. What happened is that God established His covenant with the children of Israel in the Sinai desert. Now what did I do? What would you folks do for laughs if you didn't have a comedian for a pass? God established His covenant with the children of Israel in the Sinai desert. He gave them the 10 Commandments, which they put in a box and they carried it. It's called the Ark of the Covenant. Put those in there. And furthermore, He gave them statutes and judgments, which are found in the books of the law, the Torah, the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. And so there are statutes that explain those laws. And that was a covenant. He said, you live by these and I'm going to bless you. And I can tell you, you can't live well enough for me to out-bless you, I promise. And so He did. Well, the problem is that once the children of Israel into Canaan land, the people began to mix the worship of God with the local gods. And so while it wasn't that they just totally abandoned the worship of Yahweh, they mixed it with the local traditions and things like that. What got worse was that during the monarchy, the government became exceeding corrupt. The government that was founded through the temple is where you were supposed to handle the welfare of the people, take care of the widows, take care of the orphans, and do things like that. They weren't doing that. The people that were powerful were actually taking money away from the widows and orphans and abusing them. The courts were corrupted by bribes. Someone who had a just cause couldn't get justice, and yet somebody that that would give a bribe and whatever could get anything they wanted. There was violence in the street, and there was blood flowing everywhere. And what had begun to reach a proportion is not only was it the violence of the the stuff that was going on there. But in the worship, there was a lot of child sacrifice taking place. Children were being killed, and blood was running in the streets. And so when that happened, God tried to discipline Israel. He brought several things. If you'll study the history, first the Philistines, the different ones would come in and whatever. And God tried to discipline them in many ways. But the problem is they refused to reform. And so we come to this text in 2 Chronicles chapter 36. The Lord, the God of their fathers, sent word to them through his messengers again and again, because he had pity on his people and on his dwelling place. But they mocked God's messengers, despised his words, scoffed at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord was aroused against his people, and there was no remedy. Let's understand the provocation of God's wrath. First of all, repeatedly, over a long period of time, God's people, leader, layman alike, were sent messengers. They were sent prophets. They were sent people to bring a word from God. God was saying, this isn't right, this is not good. But what they did to that, and they mocked them, and they scoffed at them. Does anybody hear late night talk shows? Mocking God, scoffing God. Yeah. Furthermore, they despised the Word of God. They didn't just ignore it. They despised it. And we're living today where there is a significant part of our population, especially among the liberal elite, that will tell you, in fact, you can read it in the humanist manifestos, saying, we need to get rid of this religion. We need to do that. We need to move on into other things. This is old stuff. We've got better. And they despise the Word of God. Okay? Are you beginning to get a picture here? When they do that, I just want to ask you a question. God's blessed them. That didn't work. God sent messengers. That didn't work. God sent discipline, where they sent famine and whatever. That didn't work. God sent invading armies. That didn't work. Would you agree with me that God's anger is justified? Amen. So why do I bring this up? A lot of people have this idea that in the Old Testament, God was this raging fire, just ready to break out on everybody, boom, boom thing. But in the New Testament, God is this loving, gentle, and Jesus is gentle Jesus, meek and mild, humble as a little child. And God is different in the New Testament than he is in the Old. First of all, you haven't read both Testaments correctly. Because I can tell you in the New Testament, there's as much wrath and judgment as there is in the Old. Okay? One of the things we need to understand is that in the Old Testament, when God broke out in wrath, it was thoroughly and perfectly justified. If anything, it was restrained. Wow. Think about that. Okay? Let me start talking about those things. I want to talk about the characteristics of God's wrath. When I get done, I hope I scare the bejeebies out of you. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. We got to the point where we're just not afraid of God. Okay? Let's talk about the first thing about the wrath of God. It's violent. Violent. I want you to think through some of the things that have come on. Think about the Genesis flood. Violent. Think about when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem. Violent. Think about how what happened when there were Assyrians. Violent. Now understand something. God can and will become violent. Oh, wait a minute. Didn't we just establish that that was justified? Oh, but if you really love somebody, you won't hurt them. Baloney. And there comes a point when you've got to take a look at the greater good and the amount of corruption and what was being done and the damage to humanity and the things that were going on at that time. God, as moral governor of the universe, is duty bound to do something.
Amen.
And believe me, He does and He will. And it will be violent. It almost always involves mass killing. Genesis flood, whole human race wiped out. Most of the animal population wiped out. Okay? In Babylon, wiped out when they were taken off to Babylon. When you talk about Jerusalem, wiped out. Whole populations gone. Think about some of the more modern day things. What about World War II? What about God's judgment on Germany? What happened when the Allies overran Germany? Firebombing, Bonn, and Berlin, and their factories and their people were firebombed, burned, and killed in mass. Come on. What about Japan? You ever hear of the atomic bomb over Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Literally thousands wiped out. You say, oh, Pastor John, we were wrong. Were we? Have you read about how the Japanese treated prisoners of war? Have you read about the Bataan Death March? Have you read about what they did to the population? Did you read about what they did to the women and children? Mass killing. Destruction of property. That includes, first of all, the homes and businesses and whatever. We talk about the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem and not one stone left on another, whatever. But if you read carefully, you'll see that it wasn't just that. What they did, they went through and ripped up all the farmland. The land lay fallow for 80 years. It was utterly, utterly destroyed. The desolation of the land. Now, well, I punched it the wrong way. The next thing we want to talk about is that it always involves the destruction of an entire people. Think about the Genesis flood. The entire world population was wiped out. The more you read it, the more you'll get the significance, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Grace, that's the only thing that saved Noah. Whole world taken out. God was grieved that He even created humanity. What about the Babylonian captivity? what wasn't killed, and most of the population was killed. Men, women, children, babies were killed. What wasn't killed was taken in captivity into Babylon and into service. Okay? What about the destruction of Jerusalem? Have you ever read what the Romans did to Jerusalem? When Titus came in and breached the wall in Jerusalem, first of all, they put a siege around it. And the siege was so tight that the people ran out of food. And women began killing their babies and eating them. You can read it in Josephus. They were fighting over rats to eat. When the Romans, what was going on, when the Romans finally breached the wall, they said they had crosses alongside both sides of the road for miles with people hung on crosses. Do you understand a little bit why Jesus said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered you under my wing as a hen gathers its chicks, but you would not, and so your city's left to you desolate." Let's go to the future. God has promised a final consummation. And in that consummation, the righteous will be caught to be with the Lord forever. But the unrighteous and the world is going up in flames. God's not kidding. And like I said, we can live in a society that wants to be indifferent, and we can live in a time that wants to party hardy and do all this kind of good. God's sending you messengers. There's churches in every town. There are people begging to be effective in soul winning. People trying to talk and to do things to get people to turn around, waving a red flag saying, "Hey, God's wrath is coming if we don't change." However, in the first three especially, I want you to notice, and this is a good thing, there is a salvation of a remnant. There's always a small group that have honored the Lord, and He has taken them. And it's not that they don't suffer. They do. But they are protected, and they are shielded by God. And they are brought out, and they become a seed to once again re-establish righteousness. Amen. God's grace. You understand what I mean when I say that God's wrath was justified and probably not nearly as bad as it could be, and justifiably so? But I want you to understand something. I want to land here. God's response is necessary. I am amazed at how warped our thinking has become. We have gotten affected by this world and have got the idea that God is arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary means simply that whatever little whim hits him, he does. Don't like it, Chuck. Bang. You know? Oh, Oakley Community Church. Too bad. Off you go. That's not God. See, people are trying to find a way to avoid this justifiable righteousness. God is not arbitrary or capricious, but He is the moral governor of the universe. He is the creator God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and scientific evidence continues to mount that you can't have the world we got without a creator. It's impossible. But we got a bunch of wizards and smart who are wise in their own eyes and tell you, no, you don't need a God. All you need is a random application of natural law, violate the second law of thermodynamics, and it can happen. I'm getting to the point where I have very little patience with this. But as creator of the universe, and especially as creators of moral agents in the human race. You see, it's one thing if we were just these creation that lived by instincts, but we spent time talking about how that we were given a free moral choice. And we are free agents. And we can choose to follow God. We can choose to not follow God. We can choose to live a life of love, or we can choose to live a life of self-centeredness. But as the creator of a class of moral agents, God is duty-bound to hold them accountable for their decisions. It's not tough. You're going to answer to God someday. I'm going to answer to God someday. I just want you to think about it. I'm standing here in this pulpit. I stand here Sunday after Sunday, and we talk about these things, and we enjoy what we're doing. But I want you to think about something. Every Sunday, I am duty-bound to preach the Word of God. Amen. And while you will stand before God, I'm going to stand before God, and I'm going to answer as to whether I faithfully preach the Word of God, or if I've watered it down and preach to people and tickle their ears, or if I've given, thus saith the Lord. Amen. It's a weighty responsibility. Now, I'm honored to be chosen for it, but folks, don't misunderstand. I'm going to be accountable for it. Now, I choose myself because I can use that example freely. But I want you to understand something too. God chose you to be and to do what you do and where you are. And you are to live out His covenant in this community, among this people. And if you don't live out, you've named the name of Christ. The commandment says, don't take the name of the Lord in vain. But too many people claim to be Christians and live like the devil. There's coming a day. There's coming a day. It's called the day of the Lord. And God's going to clean it up. But I guarantee you, we can talk about, I want to go to be with the Lord. Well, that's fine. But I'm going to tell you something. The day of the Lord is not the happy time that many people think it's cracked up to be. God's the moral governor of the universe. Just as our president, our governor, our mayors who are in the executive positions and control of police forces are duty-bound to enforce the law through the officers and the courts and to bring punishment on people who break the law, God is in the same position and does it on a cosmic basis.
Amen.
We've forgotten that. And I'm going to tell you something. I spent 3 weeks talking about God's love, saying, won't you come back? Won't you come back? Won't you reform? Won't you come back? Won't you be clean? Won't you come? And the more it seems like he calls in this day and age, the more he's mocked, the more he's despised. And at some point, God gets mad. He gets angry. Because he put a good world in there. He gave people all the breaks. He blessed us. It rains on the just and the unjust. He blessed us. And to continue to violate his love, his word, his call, his attempt, at some point we do what the children of Israel said, where it said that they stepped over a line and there was no more remedy. And the next thing we talk about is the Babylonian captivity. I'm concerned about America. You know that. I'm not saying anything here. And I know some of you may think that I lean to one party or another, but I don't. Frankly, at this point, I find both parties offensive. I'm a Christian first.
Amen.
Okay, I'm a Christian first. I'm a conservative second. And I ain't nothing after that. But as a Christian, I look at what's going on in our nation, and all I can do is pray. After the last presidential election, it was at that point I realized that if America is going to be restored, it's going to be because of my efforts and men like me. Well, Pastor John, you're a nobody. That's absolutely right. Please know that. See, God uses nobodies to overthrow the somebodies. Right? Come on. Come on. Somebody say amen and smile. Come on. You see, it's just the little things. The Roman Empire was exceeding corrupt. Do you know how it got overthrown? Christians just living the life, reaching their neighbors, doing what was right. You can read it in Gibbon's the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. It's there. Folks, it is just about time that we get a lot afraid of God. We are treading on very, very dangerous ground. And the sad part of it is that those of us who have tried to be faithful, we may be part of the remnant, but we will also suffer with people. We will suffer. You see, there's consequences to sin. But God's response is necessary because He is the moral governor of the universe. I close this rather sober Labor Day sermon with this proverb. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. After all I've said, isn't that almost anticlimactic? You know, you I want to say, I was thinking about that, I want to say, you think? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And we need to fear God. There's a healthy filial fear. Oh, I know. I thank God for His eminence, and I thank God for being a personal God, and I thank God for being and doing all that He does. But there's a certain sense I'm afraid of. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, I've done my best to accurately portray you and your wrath, the justification of it and the necessity of it. And I understand, Lord, I'm feeble, and it absolutely has not done justice to the subject. But Father, if you just take these feeble words, drive them deep into our hearts, and change us. Help us to quit being so flippant. Help us to quit taking your goodness for granted. Father, as we conclude this series, help us to realize that a lot of the stuff, that at this point, all of the stuff that you're bringing is discipline and calling and saying, America, come back. Send revival. Break the forces of humanism. Break the forces of socialism. Father, break the forces of naturalism that want to destroy our faith. And Father, teach our people a lie. Help us, God. Have mercy on us. Amen.